Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Cedar.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Cedar.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Tuesday, March 17th, 2020. My name is Sam Cedar. This is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live many, many steps from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal, the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, Nation Magazine Justice Correspondent and Alfred Nobler Fellow at Type Media Center, Elie Mystal will be here. Why a Democratic election win must come with Supreme Court reform. Meanwhile, only now is the White House F-up on COVID becoming clear to the country and to themselves. Also on the program today, closures and new guidelines as state governors are on their own to find ventilators. Meanwhile, the White House wants a huge corporate bailout as it cuts back on paid leave for people. And yes, it's primary day, but not in Ohio. We do have Illinois, Arizona, and Florida. The Department of Justice quietly stops prosecution of a Russian company charged with defrauding the United States. And the UK, or I should say Spain, follows Italy. The UK will follow Spain, and so on, as the world attempts to fight COVID-19. All this and more on today's program, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the program. I am now set up in a remote location. I gotta say, if I do say so myself, not too bad, not too shabby. I'm working on it. It almost looks like home in the back here. I've got a couple other adjustments that need to be made. Going to ask your indulgence for the next couple of days. It's a little bit tricky. I am working the audio and the inputs and the broadcasting and the phones and the IMs, and hopefully my kids are doing their makeshift school. New York schools are now shut. They will actually start getting next week lesson plans from their school. I understand that you're only getting sound out of one ear. I don't know why that's the case. I don't know how to fix that, but apologies. Yeah, I'm not sure why that's happening on YouTube, but not on Vimeo. I don't know. I don't know how to fix that. And but we will be endeavoring to sort of upgrade the show as we go. It is not available as a live audio stream. I think a lot of people may realize that by now. We're going to fix that in the next couple of days. So, all of this is going to come together. I'm going to get more comfortable. I realize I need another monitor, and you will probably undoubtedly see why as we go. But We also have the Majority Report Twitter feed right there, right over there. You can see it right there. And we'll leave that up today. I don't know. I'm going to play around with this stuff. But thank you for your indulgence. We all got out of the office yesterday, said our goodbyes, and now we're all working from home. One of the things that we're going to start to try and do on a regular basis, daily, and we're going to look for you folks to help us with this resource. For now, we'll use majorityreporters@gmail.com, but maybe we will come up with a different web or email. I don't know why I always do that, but if you're going to send something to this, please keep it in the spirit of what we're doing and put into the subject plugs and notices. Plugs and notices. This is where we're going to just give a couple of plugs if there's resources out there for folks. And also, I'm going to highlight a couple of notices maybe I've seen on Twitter, or maybe I've seen it released by a doctor or something to that effect. I'm not sure quite yet what the notice is going to be or the plug, but nevertheless, there was something that there was a press conference yesterday. Donald Trump came out, pretended like a week ago he was not saying this was a hoax, and which we should be thankful for. And he went on to hand it over to the doctors that he attempts to throw under the bus at various times. And one of them said something that really struck me, which was, they're always behind in their response because this COVID-19 is moving so quickly. And I think that's also an apt metaphor for the way that we should be functioning now, right? There's a lot of people who are still going out. And I think, I think there's different things that we can attribute it to. Maybe, some people don't read social media as much, so they don't see notices coming from Italy, or they don't see the dire predictions. They're not watching the news, or it's just very hard to wrap our heads around this. But the idea is that you should be thinking about what could happen 2 weeks from now or 3 weeks from now. And obviously, if the whole thing fizzles, which I don't think it will, I don't think there's any indication that it will, or that everything's going to return to normal within 2 weeks. That's not going to happen. But even if that's your natural instinct to believe, tell yourself, well, if that's the case, then I can resume normalcy very easily. But I want you to sort of project out 3 weeks down the road, 4 weeks down the road. There's a lot of reports of folks in their 20s and their 30s. There was something that I read that suggested in North Korea, in South Korea, apparently there was a significant cohort of people who got it were part of some type of religious cult, and they were fairly young people. So the data coming out of there may be a bit skewed, but the bottom line is that what they found is the combination of people in their 20s and 30s, the incidents, there's certainly incidents, and I think there's some people in New Jersey right now around that age who are very ill. But the incidence of them manifesting symptoms was lower, obviously, than older people, but also their social activity was far greater. So essentially what they're doing is they're going around and infecting almost 10 times more people than someone who is 60 and has the disease, the virus. So, obviously it's to protect other people, but it's also to protect yourselves, because we're going to hit a point where people are not going to get paid for an extended period of time. And this has the potential of creating a lot of turmoil. And or it also has the potential of creating a very strong community spirit. We'll talk about that in a second. But people need to anticipate these things. You need to be thinking about, how you're going to deal with this stuff, and in terms of like supplies, and in terms of like, cash and whatnot. And it's also possible that we may get, and there's been a lot of rumors going around this, but we just saw in San Francisco they're doing a what's it called? Some type of requirement to shelter. I'm not exactly sure what the phrase is off the top of my head, but and my understanding is it's not been strictly enforced yet, but it could be. It could be, and the other thing to contemplate here, I've also seen notice somebody was saying is that their mail carrier got an order from the National Guard. I imagine it's San Francisco Bay Area, shelter in place. We could be seeing a lot of that. We've seen a lot, at least in some of the major cities, of shutting down restaurants and bars and whatnot, and maybe just takeout food. We could also start seeing domestic travel shut down. We're not there yet. I don't know if we're going to get there, but I think like the way to prepare for this is to assume that this trajectory is going to follow, and it's following at an incredibly rapid pace. A week ago, I thought I was going to be in LA today. And on Friday, we were talking like, well, we'll probably end up doing this until next Friday in the office. Things are moving very quickly, and you need to be prepared. You need to try and get out in front of them rather than playing catch up. And so make an assessment around your apartment, your house, wherever you are. Determine what you're going to need. I've heard reports that ibuprofen, if you get coronavirus, is not the best thing to take, but you should stock up on that, and Tylenol. If you have any prescription medications, you should stock up on that to the extent that you can. My doctor is in self-quarantine now. I don't know that he has it. I don't know that he has it, but there's no tests apparently in New York. Hopefully there will be soon. But this is a major screw up. We will talk about the U.S. government had the opportunity to buy these tests from a German manufacturer weeks ago. And I am quite convinced that at one point we're going to find out that members of the Trump administration saw this as a profit opportunity. So rather than get it from a different company, they thought they could hand out a contract to somebody. This is all speculation on my part, but really the only thing that makes sense. And I have a feeling there are people in the administration now who know this. They may be officials at the CDC or whatnot, and they're not going to tell us until the end, because I think a lot of them are sitting there going, I have a responsibility to stay in this job. And if I say anything, I'm going to lose it. And God knows the idiots they'll put in after me. So I think that's what's going on there. Also, I want to we're going to put this in the podcast description and the YouTube description. InvisibleHandsDeliver.com. InvisibleHandsDeliver.com. Right now, as far as I can tell, this is just in New Jersey, New York, and parts of New York, basically New York City. But more people may join it. It is basically younger people who are delivering goods to people who need to either self-quarantine or are older, and going out represents more of a danger to them. But I would tell you, if you go out and do this stuff, please, if you can get a hold of some gloves, do it. If you can get a hold of a mask, also helpful. But even taking a rag or paper when you're opening doors and stuff like that will save you. So check that out. Also, you're in today. You're in for a while. Hopefully, many of you staying in. Some new reading for you. Corey Pine, who writes our AM Quickie half the time, launched a, I don't know if this is an email or a email blast or just a, it's also a site too. It's called theend.substack.com. He's writing it with Guardian journalist Jason Wilson. Check it out, theend.substack.com. We'll put that link in the descriptions of everything. Also, while you're in at home, good chance to you're looking to kill some time. Maybe you're thinking about when all this is over, or maybe even now you're thinking like, maybe I'll start a home business or something. Capterra is the place to go if you have questions about solutions, essentially, for your business, software solutions. And you can simplify your search by going there. The website has millions of people are using it now. And on a monthly basis, you can filter software by price and features. You can compare your top options side by side. You can determine your favorites. It's sort of stunning. Somebody made fun of me for saying that so many times, just in general. But they have 700 specific categories of software, 700 different industries or businesses, small businesses, online businesses, dog walking businesses, retail businesses, everything you can imagine. And it's free. You head over there, you find the category that describes the business that you are running. And then they have, I don't know, sometimes like 20, 25, sometimes more, sometimes a little bit less. It depends on how many different software products that provide solutions for that business. And then they have reviews from verified users. Over 1 million of these pieces of software have been reviewed, or I should say there are over 1 million reviews of the products. No matter what kind of software your business needs, Capterra makes it easy to discover the right solution fast. I like to meander through these things, think about what job I would be doing if I wasn't doing this. Still may do it. I don't know. I mean, I'll stick around and do this for a while, at the very least, until we're through this thing. But then, I don't know. Maybe I'll go and I'll open a yoga studio. Visit Capterra.com/majority for free today to find the right software choice for your business. That's Capterra.com/majority. Capterra, CAPTERRA.com/majority. Capterra, software selection simplified. So here's the deal, folks. I mean, this is a guest that we booked before this crap show. And, you know, part of what I think what we want to do here is to continue to do what we're doing. And, you know, we'll give you updates on COVID-19, and we'll talk about all the other politics. We're going to talk about the primaries tonight. We weren't sure if the primaries were actually going to happen. There's no point in talking about polling. Who knows who's going to come out? Frankly, I'm not even sure that I don't understand how this is responsible that we're having the primary. We'll talk about that. Maybe we'll talk about that with Elie a little bit as well, because I don't see how we can come up with any type of like, I just don't understand how we can be doing this at this point. It seems to go against all the warnings that we're getting. And nevertheless, there's going to be an outcome. And we're going to have to stick with it. I don't know. maybe it benefits Bernie. Maybe it doesn't benefit Bernie. It doesn't. I mean, that to me is sort of secondary to the fact that you wouldn't want to do this now, and good for Ohio. But nevertheless, we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll be talking to Elie Mystal. Be right back after this as soon as I can do this. Right. Hold on. Bear with me. Oh, wait a second. That's not going to work. We're not going to be able to have any music, but I'll get there, folks. I'll get there. We will be right back. Okay, we are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report on the phone. It is a pleasure to welcome to the program Elie Mystal. He is the Nation's magazine's justice correspondent and the Alfred Nobler Fellow at the Type Media Center. Elie, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me on. Thanks for not making me go outside in this global pandemic crisis.
My pleasure. Now, so you wrote a piece in the Nation magazine. I was just talking about how the time has the pace of things has moved quite quickly, and you wrote a piece about the, I guess on some level, imagining starting with the premise that even if the Democrats were to take the House and the Senate and the presidency, even in overwhelming fashion in November, which and you and I are going to talk a little bit about the chance of having an election in November in a minute. But let's presume that there's going to be, and I think it's let's presume that the Democrats win the presidency and also take back the Senate. From your perspective, it'll be all for naught because of the Supreme Court.
Yeah, I think it's look. I've been on this soapbox for a while here. There are three branches of government, and most of the media only focuses on the first two. Congress and the president get all of the coverage. The third branch, the Supreme Court, doesn't get as much coverage and isn't covered politically, and it should be, because the Supreme Court has turned itself into an entirely politicized body. If you didn't get it, when McConnell blocked Merrick Garland simply because Garland was nominated by a Democratic president, you surely should have gotten it when Trump nominated Brett Kavanaugh and pushed forward an arch conservative with alleged attempted rape allegations hanging over him just because he would be a solid vote for Trump's agenda. Given how the court has been manipulated towards the Republican advantage, it is unconscionable to me that you're a Democratic candidate running for president with all of these grand ideas and plans, and yet don't have a plan to deal with the fact that the Supreme Court is going to knock you down. Anything that the Democrats want to do on climate change, anything that the Democrats want to do on gun control, anything that the Democrats want to do on health care will be stymied by John Roberts and his four conservative buddies on the Supreme Court. And so we have to think, I think, very critically and very deeply about ways to reform the Supreme Court. Court hacking.
Before we get there, I want to get to that in a bit. But I mean, let's just stop for a moment and marinate on the fact that the two candidates that we have now in the race seem to be, in some respects, the least inclined to reform the court in any structural fashion. In fact, Biden's surrogate, Chris Coons, has said publicly, if we take back the Senate, meaning the Democrats, he wants to reinstitute the filibuster on judges for the Republicans. I mean, and Sanders seems to be, a little bit of an institutionalist in this respect. He hasn't come out with either a filibuster reform or a plan for the Supreme Court. Pete Buttigieg was the only one who seemed to have any type of a plan. He sort of abandoned it when he made his turn to the right. But let's talk about the Buttigieg plan, because it was, I think, there was something similar. He adopted part of it from Matt Ford, I believe, and I can't remember where he wrote, but I think we spoke to him about that about a year and a half ago.
Yeah, Buttigieg's plan was an interesting way of going about it. Basically, without getting too much into the legal weeds, he wanted to have five avowed liberal justices, five avowed conservative justices, and five judges in the middle, moderates he called them, who would kind of work to balance the court. There are lots of constitutional questions about that. There are a lot of political questions about that. But in spirit, it was an aggressive idea to reform how the Supreme Court operates at a fundamental level. Buttigieg, I think to his credit, was particularly concerned about this issue on the campaign trail, again, before he went, right-wing.
Right.
He was very consistent about how his own marriage is only made possible by one vote on the Supreme Court. And because of that personal experience, he was arguing that he had a particular, understanding and appreciation for how deeply important the Supreme Court is to our system of laws and to our politics as well.
Let's go into the weeds a little bit about it, because we're all locked in our homes. But honestly,
I wrote 5,000 words.
Well,
There's
yes.
that.
I mean, let's just talk a little bit about how one would achieve that. And one of the problems, I mean, aside from all the complications in terms of the legal questions, and I think, when we examine his plan, it'll bring up some other sort of obstacles to reform or issues in terms of reform. But just on like a from a non-structural standpoint, it's also sort of hard to assess, who's liberal, who's moderate, and who's conservative on some level, right? I mean,
it's absolutely, Sam, and it's one of the ways that I feel like the media has generally failed us when it comes to covering the Supreme Court. we think, people are told that there are moderate judges out there, judges who are not political, who stay above the politics of the day and just focus on the law. And that's just not true. That's just not how the law works. That's just not how judicial decision making works. You can find a judge who is moderate on some areas of the law who's actually an extremist on other areas of the law. And the example that I used in my article is the kind of key one, Anthony Kennedy, former Justice Anthony Kennedy, who was called a moderate because he occasionally broke from the Republican orthodoxy on issues of rights, especially gay rights. And so that made people think that Kennedy was some kind of moderate kind of standard bearer. In fact, while yes, he did believe in strong in a more equal version of civil rights, especially when it comes to the gay and lesbian community, he got there because he happens to be an extremist when it comes to the First Amendment. Kennedy was a First Amendment absolutist. Kennedy is the guy who wrote Citizens United, which is currently destroying our political culture, right? That's an example of Kennedy's extremism on one issue of the law that has sweeping effects on our entire system. That is not a moderate. His position in Citizens United was not a moderate opinion. Kennedy was no moderate when it came to the First Amendment. He was willing to go with. He was not an ideologue in the way that like Brett Kavanaugh or Sam Alito are, but he was no moderate, and that's part of that's part of the way that we need to reform our thinking about the Supreme Courts and what judges do in general. There is no moderation really. There are people who believe certain things about the law, and there are people who are more kind of willing to push their agenda and their ideology into every case. And there are people who are more willing to kind of take things on a case-by-case basis and kind of adjudicate cases that way. That's really the distinction. It's a case-by-case versus ideologically driven understanding, less than a liberal conservative moderation point.
Right, and we should also say too that the one of the things that escapes this is just sort of like and I think this is the right seems to have been able to define those terms in terms of liberal, conservative, and moderate in the context of largely, it seems to me, the areas of like the culture war, maybe in criminal justice as well, and civil rights and civil liberties. But there's a whole body of decisions that are made about corporations that get absolutely no scrutiny whatsoever. And I just remember back listening to Pam Carlin, I don't know, about 10 years ago speak, saying that we have not put there's been no justice who has been replaced by someone to the left of them in decades on a whole host of these issues.
There are two things at play, right? One is the general rightward lurching of the Supreme Court in our lifetimes. I'm 41 years old, and Pam Carlin is exactly right. There has not in my life has a justice been replaced by a more liberal version of themselves. I guess maybe that's not true. Maybe Souter was, replacing Sotomayor with Souter. That's probably a leftward tilt. But other than that, there really hasn't been, right? And the reason for that is that the Republicans, and especially through their kind of judiciary enforcement club, the Federalist Society, have been so effective at winning the argument, okay? The Federalist Society is basically a marketing strategy in search of a legal ideology, right? Their marketing strategy is what people have called originalism, some kind of belief that the Constitution should be interpreted whenever possible in the ways that the people who wrote the document would have understood the laws and the terms at the time, right? And that's why you have originalists like Neil Gorsuch, who is basically like, reading the Canterbury Tales every time he's trying to figure out which way what would the wife of Bath have done, is basically Neil Gorsuch's judicial philosophy, right? it works because first of all it fits on a bumper sticker, right?
Right.
It sounds reasonable, but what originalism really is, it's all about locking in the interpretation of the law back in a time before black people could vote, before women could vote, before gay people had rights at all. It's locking in a version of the law in a kind of old school white supremacist way, white patriarchy way, that most people have, most of the country are against. Like, if you actually poll people and you ask them, should we think of the law or the terms of the law in the way that we modernly understand these terms, or in the way that they understood them in the 18th century, most people will say, well, we should have a modern interpretation. But they've won the kind of marketing argument around originalism.
And I would argue, too, just to add on that point, is that I'm not even convinced that it's really, like, it's really more of like, this guy's, and it's a guy, this guy's projection of what they thought in, both, sort of like tainted by his own sort of sense of white supremacy, frankly, white male supremacy, projecting it on to them, because in many instances that's not even the case
Federal
either.
Society acts like it has like a Ouija board,
right,
that it's able to use to contact James Madison every time they have a question. That's just not true. And just to emphasize the point of how I was going to use a bad word, just how disingenuous the originalism argument is. The most famous originalism decision of our lifetime is Antonin Scalia's opinion in D.C. versus Heller. That's the big gun case that eviscerated kind of gun reform and gun control laws throughout the country. It is in that case that Mr. Originalism himself invented a new gun right. The right to hold a gun for personal self-protection was never said in the Constitution, was never said in the lead-up to the Constitution, was never said in any of the kind of there's no documentary evidence that is what Jefferson and Madison and Hamilton were thinking about when they wrote the Second Amendment. Scalia invented that right in 2000, in the 2000s, saying, "Oh, well, if they were alive today, they would surely understand this as a right to own a gun for personal self-defense." So originalists will invent new rights when it suits them.
Right.
They just have a nice marketing strategy around it. So the Federal Society has, but again, the key issue here is that the Federal Society has won this kind of marketing debate, and it's been able to get basically all of their Republican judges on the same line, on the same kind of groupthink party line decision, so that to advance in Republican jurisprudence, right, to get the job as the clerk for the high-ranking judge, to get the appointment to the district court, to the lower court, whatever, to get the invitation to speak in front of the people that will promote your career, you have to accept this doctrine. The liberals have no comparable doctrine, and quite frankly, as much as sometimes people say, like, oh, maybe we should, like, no, like, part of being a liberal is that we don't believe that there should be some one all-encompassing ideology or doctrine that can be shoehorned into every single case that we have.
I think it was Learned Hand, right, who said being liberal means you're not quite sure if you're right in the context of the Supreme Court. I believe it was him. But I would also add that, to the extent that the left, as it were, has attempted to create its own organization, that would be the ACS, the American Constitution Society. And in many respects, because people on the left, i.e. Democrats, have not gotten with the program, that became, in some ways, almost a liability, because the right would target these people and knock them down when they came up for nomination. And there was not enough. I mean, there is also, putting aside the sort of the superior marketing, it seems to me that on the left, and I know, you're probably the last person maybe in the world I need to tell this to, but there is a severe lack of appreciation of the importance of, that's why you wrote the piece. That's why, but there it's just a severe lack of appreciation on the left for the role of the court in our society and all the courts. I mean, not just Supreme Court, but like, you know, the D.C. Circuit Court.
There's an asymmetrical war the left fights on the courts, and the reason why is that and this is going to be my second point here. So the Federal Society has won the marketing argument, but the Republican politicians for a generation have done an excellent job of explaining to their voters why the Supreme Court is important. Okay? So it's not that some Republican voter in Iowa is any more like legally, aware than a Democratic voter in Florida. That's not what it is. The difference is that the Republican candidate in Iowa tells his voters, hey, the reason why I can or cannot do this is because of judges, right? And it's raw and it's disgusting, but they do it all the time. You don't like them men kissing? Well, it's the Supreme Court's fault. You don't like that woman who seems to have control over her own body? That's the Supreme Court's fault. They tell their voters directly that the Supreme Court is why they can't have nice things. Liberals, on the other hand, especially our elected officials, do not tell our voters how important the Supreme Court is. So when bad things happen, and you brought this up, and it's so important, the John Roberts Court has been the most pro-business court in American history by far, and it was before he got a Republican majority. All right, the Roberts Court will go down in history as the most pro-business court ever in American history, and most Democrats do not know that because most Democratic politicians have not told their voters why these things are happening, right? So when we talk, and I'm not slamming Bernie here, but when we talk about millionaires and billionaires and all of we don't make that second level connection of like the reason millionaires and billionaires have been able to dominate the system is because of the Supreme Court.
Yeah,
and we don't make that second level connection to our voters to get them motivated and kind of on the ground ready to vote for Democrats, not because they agree with policy X or policy Y, but because they know that the Democrats will nominate judges that are good.
I mean, I share your frustration. I mean, I feel like Sanders does not articulate this, I think, to a certain extent because of his, I think, democratic socialism does not engage or does not engage with some of the sort of the structural, I think, realities of the American government. On the other hand, Joe Biden is not saying anything because, frankly, I think that he and his ilk appreciate not having to litigate these things publicly. They're happy where it lands. I mean, that seems to me to be the dilemma that we have, is that to the extent that there's a left in the Democratic Party that has a problem with these decisions, they do not focus on the structural issues that are there. And to the extent that we have another part of the Democratic Party, they are, they're like, well, the referee said we can't do it, so we can't do it. Or the referee made this call, and so, what can we do? And I'm not convinced that that's not convenient for them. I mean, why else would Chris Coons get out there and say, we need to reinstitute the filibuster if the Republicans, if we take power? I mean, that's just absurd.
I think there are two issues in play that Biden is at the center of two failures in the Democratic Party here on this issue. One is the long-standing reluctance of Democratic elected officials, male Democratic elected officials, to fight the abortion fight in the trenches, right? They are still of a time, people like Biden are still of a time where they thought the right answer was that abortion should be safe, legal, and rare. And when I say of a time, that's also what last nominee's vice presidential nominee Tim Kaine used to say. Safe, legal, and rare, right? They don't want to fight the abortion issue. The Supreme Court makes you fight the abortion issue, and so they're afraid of running on the Supreme Court because they're afraid of having the abortion issue front and center, and it's one of the reasons why we have lost the abortion issue, why we're on a 20-year losing streak on a women's right to choose. Women Democrats are willing to fight it. Cecile Richards will be the first woman to stand a post if it needs to be fought for, right? But male Democratic leaders are not willing to fight this issue in the way that it needs to be fought, and that devolves into a weakness when it comes to the Supreme Court. That's number one. Number two, people like Biden are desperate for a return to normal, a return to institutionalism, and that also means a return to a depoliticized Supreme Court. That is one of the problems that I have had in the past with the American Constitution Society, the ACS, the Federal Society, liberal version of it that you mentioned earlier. Now they have a new leader, Russ Feingold, former Senator Russ Feingold. He might change that organization quite a bit. But previously, the ACS has been an organization kind of committed to depoliticizing the courts. That's not what the FedSoc does. The FedSoc politicizes the hell out of it and wins, right? The Democrats have been unwilling to understand that the courts have been politicized, and so we need to fight for them with the political tools available to us, right? Biden doesn't want to do that. Quite frankly, and, love the guy, have a picture of him on my wall, but Obama wasn't either. Obama was fundamentally a Supreme Court depoliticized institutionalist, and he approached his Supreme Court appointments in very much that way, the kind of reserved, slow. Look at the difference between Obama's speed of appointments versus Trump's, right? That's all Trump and McConnell want to do is appoint judges. Obama was considered, they vetted them very deeply, they made sure they were credentialed and blah, 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 blah. But Trump is just like, hey, you Republican, come on down. You can be on a court. The Republicans have been willing to politicize the court. The Democrats have tried to depoliticize the courts. That is why the Democrats are losing the political battle for the courts.
There's a lot to talk about. One, we should say that Brian Fallon, a former Obama official, has set up basically an organization that is, developing the lists that, the equivalent lists.
Demand justice. I love those guys. I've been to a couple of talks with them. Fallon gets it. Having been through the Obama administration, having worked for Hillary Clinton on her campaign, Fallon gets how and why we've lost the courts. And I feel like his organization, Demand Justice, is the group that is trying to fight fire with fire. Now, they're not as well funded as the FedSoc. That's something else we haven't talked about. The FedSoc is well funded by the Koch brothers, by the Mercer families. You name me a rich Republican donor, and I will promise you that he has donated large sums of money to the Federalist Society. The Federalist Society is one of the best funded political action organizations in the country. Liberals have no kind of counterpart because our liberal billionaires, when they have their money, they run for president with it.
Well, and on top of that, I think, frankly, they're not too displeased with the way the court operates, right? I mean,
that's your point about how a lot of these people, they're happy where it lands, right?
Exactly. Mike Bloomberg can go out.
I'm talking about stopping the most pro-business court in American history. Why would you agree with me?
Right. Exactly. And I'm curious, but maybe we should save this for another day, what your perspective is on Feingold. He was one of my favorite senators, but to the extent that I had an issue with him, he was also very much of an institutionalist in that respect. And I'm curious as to where he'll land, but let's table that for another day. So what can we do in terms of reform? Like, let's say that there was, President Sanders gets in and says, I saw Brian Fallon, I saw an interview with him, and he's my guy. I'm not only going to take his list, but whatever he says in terms of reforming the court, if he's got ideas, I'll do it. What would those ideas be?
First of all, we have to pack it. And I say we have to pack it not because I want to be some kind of FDR partisan hack. It's because packing the court is actually the only constitutional tool available. The problem with Pete Buttigieg's plan, the problem with a lot of other really interesting, cool reform ideas is that the Constitution is very clear. The number of Supreme Court justices is not set in the Constitution, but who gets to appoint them is. That's the president. That they are allowed to serve for life is very clear in the Constitution. So all of your ideas about term limits or what have you, those are constitutionally questionable. And as I said in my piece, we have to remember that any Supreme Court reform plan will ultimately be ruled on by the current Supreme Court, stacked as it is with Republicans. So if there's any legal whatever, we can assume the Republicans will protect themselves on the Supreme Court and will not authorize any of these novel, interesting reform plans. The one clear constitutional tool that we have is to increase the number of justices. It has been done multiple times in American history, mainly before the Civil War. I think we started with 6, and we went to 10, and then we're back to 9. And quite frankly, the court we've already changed the number of justices of the Supreme Court in my lifetime because Mitch McConnell decided that we could have 8 justices instead of 9 as long as a Democrat was president. So we have to change the number. Now,
let me ask you just one question. One question about the lifetime appointment. I think Buttigieg's plan had this, and I think Matt Ford's from TNR, like I mentioned, had this feature where it says lifetime appointment to the judiciary. Is it specifically to the Supreme Court? Because there is some there is a theory, anyways, that what you could do is say, okay, you get to spend 8 years or 16 years on the Supreme Court, and then you go back to the appeals court. You're there for a lifetime. You're a judge for life, but you go back to the appeals court. Is that too hazy? Do we have to do that the second bite after we pack the court? Then we go back to them with this reform movement.
I think that theory that is exactly right. It's a theory that's been promoted by Professor Larry Tribe at Harvard Law School, a constitutional scholar. I agree with it. Roberts isn't going to agree.
Okay.
I mean that's the real.
Well, he's just calling balls and strikes.
Sorry, what?
He's just calling balls and strikes, anyways.
Right. The real politique of it is that if you go to John Roberts and you say, we need to make this reform so basically you Republicans have less power, he's going to say no. And he's the final arbiter on whether or not this theory is constitutional or not. As long as Roberts has the majority, you can't get a novel reform package through him. So I agree that term limits should be theoretically, constitutionally possible without a constitutional amendment, but I don't know that I can get 5 Republicans to agree with me. And if I can't get at least one of the 5 Republicans to agree with me, then it doesn't frickin' matter what I think, right? So that's my problem with term limits, and that's how I get back to court packing. They don't have the option to disagree with court packing because it's spelled out directly in the damn document itself, right? So I say we got to pack the courts, but how we pack the courts I think is important. You know, their plans are just like, let's just add 2 because Gorsuch is illegitimate and Kavanaugh is accused of attempted rape. I don't think that purely partisan court packing works. I want to blow it up. I want to go to 10 more justices. So the Supreme Court has 19 people as opposed to 9, and basically make the Supreme Court look much more like all the other federal courts. People forget 9 is not a magic number. The Circuit Court of Appeals from the Ninth Circuit out in California, they have 29 justices, right? Second Circuit where I live, 15. Fifth Circuit in Texas, 17. More justices is a feature throughout our system except for on the Supreme Court. When you have more justices, that's how you get more moderate opinions. Like if you're actually interested in moderation, the way you get more moderate opinions is not to find this mythical unicorn moderate judge. It's to have judges who are trying to write opinions that are going to build a coalition of not 4 of their buddies from the hunting lodge, but actually 10 entirely distinct legal individuals that by its own nature will moderate and circumscribe the opinions of the Supreme Court. So that's the one thing. The second thing,
I should just say it's a recognition that there is politicking going on there, and instead of just making it like a back room type of situation, I mean, we're still talking only 19 people, but it definitely opens it up more.
It opens it up more. It makes each one of the things I've said, not in this piece, but I've said in general, you can't decrease the power of the Supreme Court, but you can nerf the power of any individual judge. Right now, if one of the justices dies, it's kind of political malpractice to support a judge of the opposite party because they are so powerful and they're going to be there for 30 years, frustrating your agenda potentially the entire time. If you have 19 judges and you think about the vagaries of retirement and death with 19 octogenarians, If somebody passes away and you don't happen to be in power at that moment, that's a bad day,
Right.
but it's survivable. It's politically survivable, right? Because each individual judge is not going to be as critically important to upholding your agenda. Right now, women's rights hangs on the shoulders of an 87-year-old three-time cancer survivor. It should never be like that. It should never be down to just one. And I think if you have 19 justices, you greatly decrease the chances of that happening. But that's only the first part. That's the tip of the spear. The shaft, I got to say, Sam, we desperately need ethics reform on the Supreme Court. I've said this, and it shocks people who don't know when I say it. The Supreme Court is the only court in the entire nation that operates under no ethics rules. Every other court, there are ethical guidelines the judges must follow, except for the Supreme Court, which is, I think, in a post or during a Me Too era, is particularly just, are you kidding me?
Right.
There's got to be some rule that says just because you're a member of the Supreme Court does not give you a license to sexually harass people for the rest of your life without accountability. Brett Kavanaugh, in addition to his alleged rape allegations, was subjected to 83 separate ethics complaints about him that were thrown out once he got to the Supreme Court because the Supreme Court has no ethics rules.
It could have been a coincidence, Elie.
What?
It could have been a coincidence. Right? I mean, if you're not in triple digits, in terms of sexual harassment complaints, like, it's probably just a coincidence.
I mean, 150, then I start to worry.
Right.
83.
Right.
It's unconscionable to me that we don't have ethics rules for these 9 most powerful people. And if you had ethics rules, that to me is also, not only do you kind of at least have some basic accountability when it comes to sexual harassment or abuse or whatever, you also, that is the way that you start to maybe break the stranglehold the Federalist Society has on these people, right? Because any real ethics guidelines would try to punish or hold accountable judges who have shown bias, right? So it shouldn't be ethical for instance, Brett Kavanaugh to do a fundraiser for the Federalist Society while he is a sitting Supreme Court judge, which he has done multiple times. It shouldn't be ethical for, say, Clarence Thomas's wife to be on the committee that Donald Trump is asking who needs to be purged from his administration post the Ukraine scandal, which is what she is doing. Because at some point, we're probably going to have a lawsuit about whether or not Trump is allowed to, purge the government, and her husband will be one of the 9 people empowered to make that decision. These are some basic ethic rules that apply to a traffic court judge in Peoria that do not apply to the Supreme Court justices. And so changing ethics rules is part of the way to break the partisan stranglehold that the FedSoc has over its people.
All right. Well, I'm convinced.
And if you could tell Bernie for me, that'd be great.
Well, I guess we'll. All right. So let's talk about the election that is taking place today. There are 3 states that are having a primary election. There was supposed to be 4. Ohio. I mean, there's no logic as to why one state, as opposed to all 4 states, have suspended their election or not. And this raises some other issues in terms of, like, what is the authority of, like, who cancels? I mean, it's one thing to cancel, like, state elections, right? Like, who cancels a federal election? I mean, this is
okay, Sam. So here's the $1 million question that I have been actually researching a lot this week. Let's start at the top to try to calm people down. The federal election, the election in November for the President of the United States and all the other federal officials, cannot be changed without an act of Congress. That is That is mandated in our statutes. Trump cannot wake up one day and decide to move the November election because he doesn't feel like having it because coronavirus is so scary. He can't do that. Now, what he might be able to do is to exercise his emergency powers under the National Emergency Act, which he did not use this week. Last week, I just have a piece up on The Nation about this actually right now. Last week, he didn't use the National Emergencies Act to declare a state of emergency. He used something called the Stafford Act to declare a state of emergency, which is fundamentally much weaker and really just about disaster relief and fine. The National Emergencies Act is the one that he used to steal money to build his wall, right? And it's that act that has truly contemplates truly tyrannical powers. So if he used that act, again, he couldn't move the date of the election without a congressional approval, but he could, quarantine everybody on election day, which is a scary thought and something that he might have the power to do under the National Emergencies Act. But here's the fun part. On the new president has to start on January 20th, January 20th, 2021. Period. That is constitutionally mandated. We will have a new administration on 1/20/21, regardless, right? So, that constitutional mandate itself suggests that we must have an election sometime between November and January, no matter what Trump wants to do, no matter what the NEA wants to do, no matter anything, because we have to have a new certified administration take over on 1/20/21 via the Constitution.
And
now, Sam, the thing that I am most afraid about is actually not Trump doing something shady. It is the Republican state governors doing something shady as the coronavirus pandemic, should that still be an issue, as it very well might be as we come into November. Because what the state governors can do, and it would be super shady, but I don't see legally how to stop them. Let's say you're Rick DeSantis, Republican governor of Florida. Let's say you got coronavirus all over Florida, right? It's election day. It can't be moved. You have no authority to move election day or close down the polls. What you can do is put Miami-Dade County under lockdown. You can quarantine them because coronavirus is so bad everybody has to stay at home. Or you can greatly restrict the amount of time they have to vote. There's a curfew. Everybody has to be done voting by 4 o'clock. But you can do that in Miami-Dade County, but you don't have to do that in the Panhandle.
right.
Tallahassee, you can vote for as much as you want. Miami-Dade, y'all can't vote. Like that, selective quarantining within the states by the state governors could greatly destroy the elections, right?
But wouldn't you have the ability at that point? I mean, I am old enough to remember 2000 and
Hanging Chads.
And now I know that they said that this was not going to apply to other elections, and despite that fact that that court case has been cited multiple times since then, but it seems to me that you would have an equal protection argument, right, for those folks in whatever county was shut down because I don't have a vote, you'd
have an equal protection argument. Under the 14th Amendment, you'd have a voting rights argument under the 15th Amendment. But Sam, like we started this talk about, whose desk does that end up on? Right. That ends up on John Roberts' desk. That's what happened in Florida. You start out at state law, and you can litigate it through. If DeSantis did something like that, you would start the lawsuits in Florida state court. You would appeal it all the way up to the Florida Supreme Court. Then you would appeal it from the Florida Supreme Court directly to the Supreme Court of the United States, where 5 Republican justices are waiting for your ass. And based on the Bush v. Gore precedent, why would you have any confidence? How can one have any confidence that the 5 conservative justices will do anything other than find a way to make sure that Donald Trump still gets to be president?
I have none. I have no confidence in that. None. Zero. I mean, I guess it depends on, maybe if one of them feels personally wronged by him in some fashion. I don't know how that would be, but something like that. But yes, that's a scary scenario. Well, let me ask you this. Lastly, what could I, if I was a voter, let's say I was a 65-year-old voter in Florida, 70-year-old voter, and I say, look, the CDC has said I'm supposed to self-quarantine, that I'm supposed to stay home. Those are the guidelines from the federal government, and it's not statutory. It's not even an order, but nevertheless, like, these are the guidelines, and it inhibits my ability to go vote. There is a roadblock that has been put up for me to vote in the form of a CDC guideline. Can I argue that, like, this primary should not have happened?
Well, again, let's break that out. The primary process is kind of completely different than the federal election process, because the primary process is basically controlled by the state parties, right? Do you have an argument in Ohio if, let's say DeWine had made you vote, had made the elections go forward, right? Would a 65-year-old person have an argument in Ohio against DeWine for forcing them to vote? Well, probably, but it would also. But I think they would have an argument, but they would lose it, I believe, because I believe what a court would say is that, well, you could have voted absentee. You knew this was coming. You had time, and as long as the states can show that they made absentee balloting kind of available, the states would probably win that. Now, that also, like, I think should alert us to the second issue and the second preparedness issue that we should be thinking about for November. We need to massively upswing our ability to get out absentee and vote by mail ballots, right?
Absolutely.
Like it is likely that is how a lot of people are more than ever before are going to have to vote in this coming election. So for the primary season, I think you would have an argument if the state did not make absentee ballots available. But as long as they made them available, but just super difficult to get, the states would probably be fine in court. We don't want to see those arguments in November. We don't want to see because, again, thinking through all the ways Republican governors might try to steal this election for Trump, we don't want to be in a situation where Republican governors are making this kind of selective absentee balloting, right? Making it easy for you to get an absentee ballot if you're in a nursing home in Palm Beach, but hard for you to get an absentee ballot if you're in a 4-4 walk-up in Broward County. Like, those are the kinds of, like, on-the-ground real issues that people need to be prepared for, because by the time you're fighting it out in court, it's kind of too late. The elections happen. As we've seen, again, from Bush v. Gore, it's probably been certified already. Like, it's just going to be very hard to put like this, overturn an election after the fact once we find out how difficult it was for certain communities to vote.
Elie Mystal, the piece is "If we don't reform the Supreme Court, nothing else will matter." It's in The Nation magazine. We will link to that at majority.fm. Thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. Stay safe.
Thanks for having me on, Sam, and you too. Wash your hands.
I will. All right. All right, folks. We're going to take a break here in a moment. We're going to head into the fun half of the program. I'm not sure what we're going to do about coverage tonight. I may hop on YouTube. Maybe I'll hop on this. We'll see. But at the very least, maybe what I'll probably do is just set up YouTube streaming and talk about the election after it happens. But I we were originally going to do a typical lead up to the vote, but I don't know that anybody can say anything with any type of, like, even remote assuredness. I mean, and I don't even know. It's hard for me to imagine that we are having this vote. And here's the thing. Older people, well, we don't know. We don't know who's going to go out to vote in this election. In Florida, in Arizona, Illinois, I don't know what percentage of the voters are over the age of 50 in Arizona and Florida. Florida, I would imagine it's quite high. In Arizona, Democratic voters. In Arizona, I would also imagine it's quite high. It's not as high as Florida, but it's going to be high. And we also just coincidentally have two candidates who their fundamental sort of voting cohorts are completely divided, almost exactly at the age of 50. Below the age of 47 or 48, I think it is, Sanders wins overwhelmingly. Above the age of 47, 48, Biden wins even more decisively. And it's quite possible that the distribution that we have between, across ages in terms of who comes out and votes tonight will be, fairly spread out. It's also possible that one group, younger people, or one group, older people, are like, I'm not going out to vote. And here we go. Let's see. Reuters poll among adults. Biden 35%, Sanders 33%, Gabbard 3%. Head-to-head, Sanders 50% and Biden 50%. That's the poll of these three states, Brendan. I don't know why I'm like signaling this to you as if you're at my computer. But who is being polled there? Or is that a national poll? The point being that, let's say older people decide not to come out and vote in Florida, in Arizona. That's national poll. Older people decide not to come out. Bernie Sanders wins. Wins big, or even wins. He's expected. The reason why everybody has written off Sanders in the national media, at least, and largely, I think, just sort of broadly speaking, a week ago, I don't think that the Sanders campaign was like, we're going to win Florida or we're going to win Arizona. The reason why that they had that everybody felt this was because that Sanders was maybe out of it is because these two, Florida has 219 delegates. Arizona has 67. I think the idea was that Biden's going to crush in those two states. Illinois has 184. They'll probably split. This is all proportional. But what if the electorate is, we have record-setting low turnout? We could be looking at like an AOC versus Crowley situation where you have a fraction of the votes that usually come out. To be fair, in a primary, Joe Crowley's primary, turnout was low, but it's considerably low anyways. But the point is that in Florida, in Arizona, in Illinois, you could have incredibly atypically low turnout, particularly for this primary. And it could be dominated by people under the age of 45. And if it is, Sanders could win big. And to be honest with you, I cannot tell you with even a remote notion as to whether that's likely or not. But if he does, you're going to hear all the Democratic establishment officials say, this is not fair. We can't let this stand. Yet they're not out there now calling for this thing to be postponed. Why are they not calling for it to be postponed? I think in part because they are hoping that Biden rolls on like people anticipated he would, and we can wrap this up, and that's the end of it. I don't know if that's a function of them being worried about Biden's, virility going forward. Certainly if, something dramatic happened to either one of the candidates and the other one was in the lead, the other one would still be there. You just suspend your campaign. You're not ending it. But I think there's just a sense of let's get this over with. But it may not work out in the way that people anticipate. I mean, personally, for me, I would say you have to cancel this election. It's too late. It's already gone on. But you're sending a wrong message to people in the middle of a pandemic that is been mishandled by this administration in terms of our response anyways. But we shall see. I wish I had a better answer for you, but we will certainly talk about this tomorrow. I should remind you, Capterra, it's the free online resource that millions use monthly to find the best software solutions for their team, for their business, for their entrepreneurial endeavor. You can search more than 700 specific categories of software, 700 different businesses that you could own or engage in, endeavors, and software for each one of those categories. And you can hear from people like you with over 1 million reviews of those products from verified users. Visit capterra.com/majority for free today to find the software tools you need for your business. Capterra, that's CAPTERRA.com/majority. Capterra, software selection simplified. Folks, we're going to head into the fun half. A reminder, it's your support that keeps this program alive. We have a lot of folks who are unable to afford the membership right now. They're worried about financial insecurity. You folks can cancel if that's the case, and we will catch up with you to make sure that you're not locked out of the member show. Or you can wait until like maybe I'm going to do maybe a short show on Thursday or Friday when we start to look at the emails, and I'll refund you if you wait to email us then for what you need a refund for. If you're one of those people who are not worried about your financial situation and you can support the show, great time to do it. But nevertheless, we'll be here either way. And just a reminder, check out the Noma Key Show. You can go to patreon.com/the Noma Key Show. She's going to be doing stuff. I think they're working it out from home or from her home. She's doing live streams. You can check her out on YouTube as well. Check out the AM Quickie. We're doing it every morning. Lucy does it on Tuesdays and Wednesdays. I will be doing it Thursday and Friday, and we'll be alternating on Mondays. And also the Michael Brooks Show. They're going to be doing it at home. Matt was working it out, so he'll be streaming, I believe, tonight. TMBS, patreon.com/TMBS. Brendan will not be performing this week. But you can also go to check out the Antifada at patreon.com. The Antifada and Literary Hangover will be available, and live streams is what I'm hearing now from Matt. And later in the week, I'm hoping to fold in technology that will allow everybody to be on mic, more or less. Not exactly sure how we're going to do that, but we'll figure it out. But now everybody seems to have their own equipment, so we should be able to do that. Yes, Michael will be going at 7 p.m. Eastern. So check it out. Also, don't forget, justcoffee.coop, fair trade coffee, tea, or chocolate. Use the coupon code majority, get 10% off. I'm not going to lie. Ordered 10 pounds yesterday. 5-pound bag of the majority blend. 5-pound bag of not WTF blend. Different blend. But so check that out. Quick break. We're going to head into the fun half, and I will do this, and I will do, Let's see. What do we do for the fun half? I'm going to do just audio today. There we go. Wait a second.
You are in for it.
646-257-3920. See you in the
Fun half.
Are you ready?
Who sent us this?
Alpha males are back, boys back, and the alpha males are back.
Just as delicious as you can imagine.
The alpha males are back, boys back, and the alpha males are back.
Just want to degrade the white man.
Alpha males are back.
I take all of it in my throat.
Alpha males are back.
Homo says what?
The alpha males are back.
You are a madman.
And the alpha males are back.
I am a total cunt.
Can we bring back DJ Danergy's song, please?
Yeah, or a couple of them. Just put them in rotation.
DJ Danergy.
Well, the problem with those is they're like 45 seconds long, so I don't know if they're enough of a break for people.
That's fucking nonsense.
Hey, folks, reminder.
I do not have Parkinson's.
And the alpha males are
Psych. Fuck them.
Homo says what?
What?
Homo says what?
Hell of a lot of bank. 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 Hell of a lot of bank.
All lives matter. Have you tried doing an impression on a college campus?
I think that there's no reason why reasonable people across the divide can't all agree with this. Psych.
And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black. African. And the alpha males are back. And the Africans are black.
See Donald Trump out there, doesn't a little part of you think that America deserves to be taken over by jihadists? Keep it at 100. Can't knock the hustle. Come on, fuck 'em. Things I do for the bigger game plan. By the way, it's my birthday. Happy birthday to me, Jew boy.
I have a thought experiment for you.
And the alpha males are back. Africans are black. Alpha males are back. Africans are black.
Come on. Come on. Someone needs to pay the price for blasphemy around here.
I am a total pussy.
All right. We are back, ladies and gentlemen. It is the fun half of the Majority Report. And Kyle was pissed. He just reminded me, like, we could have the whole gang in on the show by calling into the phone system. Shoot, I don't know what the phone number I have up here is. I think it's this one. Let's hope so. Let's take a phone call just to try this out. Calling from a 973 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam. It's John calling from Washington, D.C. How's it going?
It's going pretty good. I'm glad that worked. Hey, John.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I've been meaning to call in for a little bit about Joe Biden's Social Security record. Kind of off topic with COVID and all that, but thought I'd bring up
there's
particularly 19.
There's a primary election going on in Florida right now, and in Arizona. And there's a lot of people who are of age to be on Social Security. And frankly, we're all going to be on Social Security. And I think, well, I mean, you go ahead and talk about his record, but, it is a problem to have a guy who has been so dedicated to cutting it. To me, it's less because I don't think you can get away. Well, go ahead. Say what you're going to say.
Yeah, well, so what I wanted to talk about, everyone talks about, like, how he's tried to cut it in the past, how he's talked about cutting it. Sam, do you know about the 1983 Social Security amendments?
I do. This was a committee that was set up during the Reagan era in anticipation of the baby boom hitting retirement age and requiring more money. And so there were hikes to the employer side and to the employee side of payroll tax.
Well, so those hikes were already set up. They just moved up the timeline. So, like, let's say the hike was supposed to take place in 1985. They just moved it to 84.
Okay.
But the other things that it did was it taxed benefits. It froze the cost of living increase for, I think, 6 months. And then it also raised the Social Security age from age 65 to 67. And it's like a graduated scale. So if you're born earlier, you might be like 65 and a half.
Right.
Someone my age is fully 67. But all of these amendments, and which I completely consider cuts, were voted on by one Joe Biden. So he didn't just try to cut Social Security. He has actively voted to cut Social Security.
Yeah, and I think, the concern isn't necessarily that he's going to come into office and finally cut Social Security, although, I mean, in the past, he's certainly been, he's like, well, I had to because there was such concern over the deficit. Here's a little surprise for people. And if this comes as a shock to you, it's because you have not followed politics.
It's not part of the deficit.
Well, first off,
like Social Security is not on the deficit.
Like statutorily, the Social Security Trust Fund cannot statutorily by law money cannot contribute to the deficit. It's just like a completely separate account. However, there's a reason why Al Gore talked about a lockbox in 2000, and that is because what people hope to do is divert this money, even though it's not contributing to the Social Security Trust Fund. The U.S. government has borrowed money from the trust fund, basically say, like, we don't want to pay that money back. That's what this is all about. That's why they want to cut Social Security benefits so that the U.S. government does not have to make good on the money that it is taken from Social Security to pay for other things like maybe tax cuts on corporations. The fact is that as soon as a Democrat gets elected to president, regardless of what is going to happen and we're going to have, I mean, if you think we have massive deficits and debt now, in 6 to 8 months, when tax revenues start to plummet because so many people have gone out of business and because there's been no economic activity, the idea that Joe Biden in the past has justified, and he justified it recently, his desire to cut Social Security based upon deficits in the past, I got news for you. It's going to be a crap storm of deficit going forward. And if he couldn't resist that temptation in the past, he is not going to resist it in the future. And he is willing to basically put the onus of the failure of taxation on the very wealthy onto everybody who has paid into this system and who has relied on it for their retirement. I mean, that should be the concern that people have. He's justified these desires for cuts because at the time everybody was worried about the deficit. I got news for you. They're going to be worried about it again because that's what happens every time a Democratic president is elected. And he certainly was worried about it in 2013 and in 2012 and in 2011. As part of the Obama administration, they offered up cuts to Social Security to the Republicans as part of a grand bargain because at the end of the day, they got no problem screwing over people in their retirement if it behooves them. Appreciate the call, man.
Yeah, thanks. Have a good one.
You too. John in Washington showing us that the call system works. I like it. This is a little bit disturbing. When we have a situation where Nancy Pelosi passed a bill in the House. I can't remember the name of it. It is the Help Paid Leave Act. Maybe it is. Some Coronavirus Paid Leave Act or something to that effect. And people have very correctly, in my estimation, criticized Pelosi for passing this bill in the House. Remember, it's a Democratic-controlled House. Passing this bill, which ends up only covering about 20% of workers. Or could, I should say, end up only covering about 20% of workers because it exempts companies over 500. It exempts businesses or at least gives an opportunity for a waiver for companies that only employ 50 people. It has all sorts of loopholes in it for companies to get around. This is sort of like the Republican dream in some way. Let's pretend that we've done something, and in fact, at the end of the day, we haven't. That's the best case scenario when Democrats pass a bill like this. This is the worst case scenario. I give you, let's roll this baby up here. Bear with me. I give you Tom Cotton, who we've been saying hypothetically for years that, if you get a Democratic administration in after Donald Trump and they don't address the root problems of this, even if they do, but particularly if they don't, you're going to get a guy like Tom Cotton coming in, and he's a lot smarter than Donald Trump. And we've seen this a little bit with Tucker Carlson, and now we're seeing it with Tom Cotton, and this should be very, very disturbing to you. When they get to the left of Democrats, and I'm convinced that part of this is also a function of what they anticipate doing with Joe Biden. Here's Tom Cotton on Fox and Friends, responding to this bill that's been passed in the House and is now headed to the Senate.
The U.S. Senate is scheduled to convene later today to consider passing the House-passed coronavirus relief bill.
So what can we expect from here? Arkansas GOP Senator Tom Cotton joins us. Senator, you've had a chance to look at what Treasury Secretary Mnuchin put together with the House and backed by the White House. Can you get behind it as it's read now?
Good morning, Brian. I don't think the House bill is going to pass the Senate as it's written for one basic problem. It doesn't go far enough and it doesn't go fast enough. There are too many gaps in coverage for the smallest businesses and for medium-sized businesses. And I and a lot of other senators who I've spoken to over the weekend are worried that we're not doing enough to get cash into the hands of affected workers and families quickly. So we're going to be focused this week on how to do just that. If you've got the virus, if you've been quarantined because you've been exposed to the virus, if your business is shut down, or even if you have to stay home to care for a child whose school is closed, you should not worry about buying the groceries, making the car payments, paying your rent. We're going to do everything we can to get cash into the hands of affected workers and families as quickly as possible so we can all get through this pandemic together.
He almost said ourselves. He almost gave away the lie, which was he was saying, like, so that I can get through. So that we can all get through this. All right. So here's the scenario we have, right? We have Tom Cotton criticizing the Democratic passed bill in the House from the left, because Tom Cotton knows what we're going to do is we're going to criticize Nancy Pelosi from the left. Donald Trump is going to criticize Joe Biden from the left in this election. Who knows if it'll work, but Tom Cotton's also really concerned about Tom Cotton more than anything else. He's already started his 2024 campaign. And I can tell you this, though. When they spend this money, if they end up spending all this money, if Joe Biden ends up being the president in 2020, they're going to be talking about the deficit. They're going to be talking about the debt has exploded. We need to tighten our belt, folks, which means we need to cut Social Security. In other words, we need to tighten your belt. Our belt is already going to be loose when it comes to the airlines or when it comes to the casinos. Literally, the casinos. Our belts are going to be loose when it comes to providing quantitative easing for the bankers, or when it comes to loaning out money at 0% interest if you're a bank. And let me rephrase that. If you're a CEO or a board of directors member of a bank, because you will use the bank to borrow that money at 0% interest. And I got news for you. You give me $1 million for free for 2 years, I will make a couple $100,000. Just I'll buy a CD and I'll make $40,000. I don't have to do anything. That's free money they're getting. And you know whose pocket that goes into, right? The bank doesn't have a pocket. The board of directors does. When the airlines right now complain about they need to be bailed out, look and see what the CEOs and the board of directors have done in terms of their stock buybacks as they drove up the prices of their own stocks so that they could cash out. We're going to be stuck with the bill. And Tom Cotton is trying to get to the left of the Democratic Party, and he's being successful because Nancy Pelosi just wanted to get something done. I mean, this is the problem with when you govern this way. You can call it the Family's First Coronavirus Response Act, but if only 20% of the workers get paid, you're not fooling anybody. Might be able to fool them quickly, in the short run, but in the long term, you're not. And you're going to end up with Donald Trump, but with actually having hair, being younger, and a lot smarter. And his name's going to be Tom Cotton. Meanwhile, and Tom Cotton, I think he like, if I'm Tom Cotton, I realize wow, once the American public figures out what's gone on with Donald Trump, forget about it. The response to this has been just atrocious. The entire Republican Party has been an abject failure in responding to this. Jesse Waters had a funny routine on Fox News yesterday. I finally decided to take it seriously after weeks of saying this was a hoax. Look at this. Oh, shoot. I didn't mean to do that. Hold on. Bear with me. Bear with me, folks. I want to play this clip from Devin Nunes. We played this yesterday, but it's important to see the juxtaposition here. This is Devin Nunes on, hold on here. This is Devin Nunes on Sunday of this week. In other words, 2 days ago. Here it is on Sunday. This is the chair, or the chair, and now the minority leader of the House Intelligence Committee.
A lot of concerns with the economy here because people are scared to go out. But I will just say, one of the things you can do if you're healthy, you and your family, it's a great time to just go out, go to a local restaurant. Yeah. Likely you can get in easily. Let's not hurt the working people in this country that are relying on wages and tips to keep their small business going.
We're very sympathetic.
Don't run to the.
Understood.
Yeah, just don't run to the grocery store and buy $4,000 of food.
Right, they're cleaning off the shelves.
Go to your local pub.
We want to be very sympathetic to what's going on.
And there's a lot of concerns.
Go to your local pub. Go to your local pub. Man, the media has completely taken that out of context, haven't they? Because people, when they hear go to your local pub or go to the restaurant, you should have no problem getting in. The media twists that around to claim that what Nunes was saying was go to the local pub or go to the restaurant because it'll be easy to get in. But that's just the media twisting everything, isn't it? Because here he is on Monday.
Right. Let me start with you, Congressman Nunes. I know you got hammered because you said you want to support a local restaurant. The good news is I can tell you these restaurants are now delivering, taking care of their customers in other ways. But I spoke to you earlier. You support the president's decision.
It's actually even these media freaks don't have a clue what's going on out in the real world. We have a problem out here because we have people standing in line for 45 minutes at Costco. And so what I was saying is you have empty restaurants. You can go through the drive-thru. You can do takeout. It's a great place to go. The media freaks can do what they want, but they're endangering lives here by continuing this panic when we have no food shortage in this country. The farmers of America produce an abundant food supply. We have more food than we can eat in this country. And we ought to stop panicking and ensure that people know they don't have to wait in a line at Costco for 30, 45 minutes. They need to stay calm.
Yeah. And Jason, Congressman.
Yeah, there you go. Sean Hannity was arguing with Dr. Fauci a week ago that he knew more about this than the doctor did. It's just like the flu. Well, actually, Sean, no, it's not. It's 10 times more deadly. But okay, but more or less like the flu. These guys are all responsible. I mean, first off, their audience. This is as sort of as dire of a warning as they're going to get. Like, don't go out and get food so that you can stay in your home. Go out, I meant the drive-through at the local pub. The drive-through at your pub. Everybody loves the drive-through at your pub where you go by and you grab a pint as you pull up in your car, your pickup. You grab a pint at the drive-through. All the drive-throughs that they have at all the restaurants, the local businesses. They are going. I think it's already happened. I don't think we've seen the deaths yet, but they have basically. I think they're going to be responsible for the deaths of hundreds, if not thousands, of people who were basically told that this is just the libs and the media freaks who are making a big deal of this. We have some structural and fundamental problems in our society that is, I think, inhibiting our ability to respond to this. And these guys are not helping. I say stunning too many times, but this stuff is pretty stunning. Calling from a 321 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam. It's Cody from St. Cloud, Florida. How you doing?
Cody from Florida. What's up?
Hey, so I woke up today and boss man called out, so I figured I wanted to lose some brain cells, so I figured I'd watch some Ben Shapiro. And he recently had a caller who called in and asked him if fascism was secretly a leftist ideology. And I just wanted to know what your thoughts were on that.
Secretly a fascist idea. Secretly a leftist ideology. Well, at least they're claiming that it's secret.
Secret. Yeah, well, Ben Shapiro, he ended up going on to explain, and he said, well, it all depends on the particular political spectrum that I guess you're using, whether it's the American or European political spectrum. And he said, I guess the political spectrum is determined on how much government intervention, according to Ben Shapiro. which is false. And he claims that by American standards, the Nazis were a leftist, were on like the left part of the political spectrum by American standards, whereas anarchism, since they want like least state intervention, they're towards the far right. So I figured we were on a pretty good track for losing brain cells today after watching that. I was just curious what your opinion overall about that was.
I mean, I think that Ben Shapiro is absurd. I mean, I think that's a fundamental misunderstanding of what left and right is. I mean, he's working on some type of like, if you've seen that 4-quadrant grid where you place yourself in terms of like authoritarianism and anarchy and I guess, civil liberties and I don't know what. What Ben is doing is he's just picking and choosing what he wants to claim is left or right. In the same way, frankly, that he, as the Pope of the Jews, decides who's a Jew and who's not a Jew. He makes this stuff up. To Tom Cotton, when he talks about providing for money for workers, I mean, it's a left critique, but is he to the left of Nancy Pelosi? I don't think so. I think he's using populism at a certain time. There is a concept of left and right populism that maybe Ben Shapiro's not aware of or just doesn't want to know about. But yeah, he's like there. This is not new. This was it. Jonah Goldberg was writing books about the fascism of the left, 15 years ago. This is just an old sort of canard that they use because they don't want to have to feel like they're responsible for fascism. And that is a right-wing ideology. I mean, just definitionally. Appreciate the call, Cody. I would not start so early in the morning with Ben Shapiro. It may not be healthy for you.
Man, you have a good day, man.
All right, stay safe. Calling from a 607 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hello?
Hello? Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hello?
Hello? Who's this? Where are you calling from?
This is Clay from Athens.
Clay from Athens, Georgia? Clay?
Yes.
Clay, do you have a... Yeah, I can. Do you have a comment?
Sorry, we had a bad connection. Yeah, Sam, I wanted to thank you for a couple months ago. You had Corey Robin on your show and did that excellent synopsis of his book, The Enigma of Clarence Thomas. I ran out and bought that, and then I went out and bought The Reactionary Mind, and also by Corey Robin. Are you familiar with it?
Yes. In fact, I interviewed him for that book as well a couple of years ago.
Well, what was striking about it, I mean, have you heard of the authoritarian personality?
You mean the work that there was a Canadian doctor, his name escapes me.
Okay, well, yeah, Altemeyer.
Altemeyer, right, Bob
and of course, these studies were fueled in the wake of World War II by all these, the interest in understanding, what caused fascism, where did all these fascists come from. But what's curious in Corey Robin's book, and also in Madeleine Albright's book on fascism, is that they never mention the authoritarian personality. They never talk about this huge, body of research that discusses it. And the last time I saw it addressed seriously in a book was in that John Dean book, Conservatives Without a Conscience, which was largely based upon
he worked with Altemeyer.
Altemeyer's research. He's an emeritus professor at the
Manitoba.
University of Manitoba.
Yes.
And I think it'd be great if you interviewed him on the show
All right,
sometime.
but
his book,
dude,
The Authoritarians,
hold on for 1 second.
is available online, and it's a very illuminating text and understanding, genesis of the authoritarian personality and the insurgency of fascism that's caused by impoverishment.
Okay.
As was the heritage of the Weimar Germany. But in any case,
all right, hold on. Can I interrupt you for 1 moment?
Interview, and boy, what a monster is Clarence Thomas. But what I want to ask you about is, during the debate, they were both advocating for minimum wage.
Right.
And there's all this discussion about Social Security, and this is all in the larger context of what socialism will look like in a capitalist system, in a capitalist world. And I was wondering about your thoughts on that in terms of the things that Yang proposed, and an egalitarian tax system structure.
All right. Well, I'm going to let you go, and I will answer your call. First, I would say I contacted Bob Altemeyer in the months leading up to Donald Trump's election, and he was contemplating coming on, but he was worried about it. And I spoke to him a couple of months afterwards, and he still was uncomfortable going public with stuff. And I haven't been in touch with him in years. We didn't have too much of an exchange. It was just on email. But folks should read about Bob Altemeyer's work. He professor at Manitoba. He was doing clinical research into the right-wing authoritarian personality. There's also a left-wing authoritarianism, but he said in terms of sheer numbers, 25% of North Americans are right-wing authoritarians. The number of left-wing authoritarians are much smaller. And he's doing a clinical analysis. Corey Robin was writing about the intellectual history and underpinnings of the conservative ideology, not the psychological and sociological personalities of these people. That's what Altemeyer was doing, and like I said, John Dean worked with him quite a bit. To be honest with you, I did not listen to your question about Bernie and Biden because you were not listening to me, so I stopped too. But Yang's proposal, we already had Mitt Romney say, we should give everybody $1,000 one-off. Like, I think Yang's proposal, we went through this ad nauseum in the run-up to the election. Not a bad idea in theory. The problem is that if it's used to cut the social safety net, it is decidedly unhelpful and problematic. Because, look, it's the same concept as block grants of Medicaid or any government program. Inflation rises, and that money starts to shrink in its value over time. And it really ends up being a means in which to cut social services for people. So problematic in that respect. Let's see what we got here. Next clip of sound. Oh, here it is. Is this Stuart Varney talking about how airlines are utilities and we must have them. And they are important. There's no doubt about it. Airlines are important. The biggest U.S. airlines spent 96% of their free cash flow last decade, over the past 10 years, on buying back their own stock shares. Why do companies do this? And you can go back and you can listen to the interviews I've done over the years with Bill Lazonick. Bill Lazonick from UMass has been on this for quite a while. When you buy back your own stock shares, in fact, this used to be illegal prior to the Reagan administration. SEC rules where you could not do this. Why? because when you buy up your own stock shares, you're raising the price of the stock. Who benefits from that? Well, it's the CEO and the board of directors who, since the 80s, when capital gains taxes became lower than wage taxes, it encouraged these companies to pay. And by companies, we have to remember, like, these are just like individuals who pass through and control the company for a while. And they have this shield that it makes it look like it's companies, but it's them. It's the CEO, it's all the members of the C-suite, it's the board of the directors. And they decide to pay themselves, but they make it seem like the company decides, but they're the ones who are the decision makers in the company. The company's decided to pay me in stock. They're going to pay me some wage. Maybe I'll get a couple $1 million as a wage, and then I'm going to get $10 million worth of stock. And it's going to vest in, 6 months, or it's going to be certain benchmarks. If I raise profits a certain amount, I get paid more in terms of bonuses, maybe in stocks probably, because that gets taxed at a considerably lower rate than if they would just pay me wages. And by I mean me, because I'm the CEO. I just got to go to the board of directors. But guess who gets to appoint the board of directors? The CEO or friends of the CEO. They're all basically running a side bet, if you will, or really just a cottage business that is attached to the corporation. So we're going to buy back our shares, and guess what? That compensation that you, and by you I mean me, paid me, has gone up in value. And they've been doing this for 10 years. They had a negative cumulative free cash flow during a decade when it repurchased more than $12.5 billion of its shares. That's the airline industry. So they are left without cash reserves because they're squeezing every dollar they can out of this. Tim Wu, who wrote The Curse of Bigness, Antitrust in the Gilded Age. I'm trying to look over at Brendan because I know that we booked him, or we were trying to book him. He writes, for American Airlines, the nation's largest airline, the mid to late 2010s were what the Bible calls year of plenty. It posted in 2015 a $7.6 billion profit compared to profits of $500 million in 2007 and $250 in 2006. I don't think we're ever going to lose money again, the company's chief executive, Doug Parker, said in 2017. He writes, there are plenty of things America could have done with all that money. It could have stored up its cash reserve for a future crisis, knowing that airlines regularly cycle through booms and busts, right? Oil prices go up. There's an oil shock. Who knows? Might have tried decisively to settle its continuing contract disputes with pilots and flight attendants and mechanics. They're making billions of dollars, and yet they're not paying their people. But they blew most of its cash on a stock buyback spree. From 2014 to 2020, Americans spent more than $15 billion buying back its own stock. So you see how this works. Doug Parker says, I got a great idea. Let's buy back our own stock. Okay. Who's got to sign off on this? The board of directors? Oh, okay. Those members of the board of directors, they all own stock in American. Doug Parker, he gets paid in stock from American Airlines. We buy back the stock. Everybody's stock price goes up. Shareholders don't complain. Doug Parker makes a ton of cash. The board of directors, they make a ton of cash. They don't put any money in cash reserves for a rainy day. They don't deal with their workers. And what they ended up doing during that time, that they're using their cash money to buy their stock, they began to borrow heavily to finance the purchase of new airplanes and retrofitting old planes to pack in more seats. So instead of using the cash that they had, which went into the pockets of the CEOs, which went into the pockets of the board of directors, They borrowed that money. 2017, analysts warned of a risk of default should the economy deteriorate, but American kept borrowing because I'm the CEO. I got a pile of money over here, and I'm going to use that to increase my compensation. Meanwhile, I'm going to leverage the company's assets to borrow a ton of money to do what needs to happen with this company. Does that leave us on shaky grounds? It does. But if stuff goes sideways, I can get the government to bail us out. And then really what the government is doing is not bailing out the company. It's basically just paying my compensation in retrospect. Tim Wu says, the question of what the public should demand from an airline bailout raises questions that transcend the business of flying. In other words, we're going to bail them out. We need an airline industry. The next several weeks will leave behind many economic victims, including nearly every provider of in-person services. Many small retailers, restaurants, businesses like caterers and fitness instructors face grim prospects. It's the economy's big player, like banks and airlines, that are best at asking for and getting government assistance. This time around, as opposed to the last economic crisis, we should start from the bottom instead of the top. In other words, if you want to bail out the airline industry, bail out the travelers who are going to go on to the airlines. They can pay the airline industry. Stuart Varney has a slightly different theory.
Belly up.
Yep. You know how Washington is going to help these industries that have been so greatly impacted. You know, you don't want to call it a bailout, instead a rescue plan, but you know how Washington works. And this is an election year. And it's going to look to some as if they are trying to choose winners and losers. And there's going to be some headwinds.
I think it's going to be a question of who deserves this. I think you can make the case that the airlines have to stay in business. They're almost like a utility. You've got to have airlines. Do you have to have cruise lines? They're in as much trouble as the airlines. Should they get that kind of bailout? Yeah. Now, there'll be all kinds of questions like that. Who gets it? Right. Who doesn't get it? To whom do you say no? Right. And that's where politics comes on board full time. Thousands will go unemployed if the cruise lines go belly up.
You know how Washington is going to help these.
First off, if airlines are like utilities, let's regulate them that way. If you want to argue that airlines are like utilities and they are so crucial to our economy, which I think is probably correct, let's regulate them that way. Let's structure what they can charge. Let's structure where they have to provide service. Let's structure how many people they can shove into a plane. Government always picks winners and losers. Always, always, always. There's never a time where government does not pick winners and losers. Never, ever. If you have a government, it's picking winners and losers the moment it's set up. Property owners, winners. That's why we have a police force. That's why we have a fire department. The value of a fire department to me, if I own multiple properties, right? I'm a landlord. The value of the fire department to me is much greater than it is if I don't own any. Me as a landlord, it's true, a fire department could save my life, and you as a renter, it could save your life too. But if I own 5 buildings, it could also save my property. Government picks winners and losers every single moment. Politics is just deciding how equitable it's going to be and who will be those winners and losers. These guys pretend there's no winners and losers. You shouldn't pick winners and losers. Government should never do that. It's impossible for government not to do that. It's just a question of who we're going to decide is the winner and the losers. If these businesses are that crucial to the United States, then we, as the United States, as the taxpayers, we should own part of them. I think it made sense to bail out the auto industry, but we should have empowered the workers more. We should have empowered the unions. We should have said when they take a haircut, they should share in the upside. And that's what should happen with the airlines. You don't get to have billions of dollars worth of profit and put it all into your pockets in stock buybacks. And then when you haven't saved up your money and you've over leveraged yourself and we got to bail you out, that you can just restart the cycle all over again. Next time, the workers participate. In fact, we bail you out. We're doing it on behalf of the pilots, of the flight attendants, of the ground crews. And guess what? They now own part of your business. So if you do stock buybacks, they get a piece of that. That's what's got to happen. If they're a utility, they should be treated like a utility. If they're important enough for us to build to buy out, if there is a systemic risk, if they go under, then the U.S. taxpayer should have a piece. Either the government should own part of it. If people are afraid of that, then we empower the workers. That's it. Bottom line. Let's put a price on that money that we're giving these people. Let's go to the phones. Oh, Brendan says that Tim Wu was on sabbatical. Calling from a 520 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Sam, this is Eric. I'm up in Phoenix, Arizona.
What's happening in Arizona? You got a primary there today.
Yeah, man. I showed up this morning. I went a little early, so I couldn't really get a good sense of it. But everyone I saw there looked to be under 45-ish. Wow. I saw one guy that I would say over his 60s. But, yeah, everyone there was pretty young. And when I asked the guy how turnout was, the manager, he told me that it was way, way better than what he had expected. So I guess hopefully that's good for Bernie.
I guess. I don't know how good I feel about that because, frankly, I think it's dangerous. But I think they should have canceled it. But I guess if they haven't, then yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And on that note, too, I'm actually a respiratory therapist. I work at a skilled nursing facility here. And, you can really tell the panic's setting in.
Well, tell me more. I mean, what's the situation there? I mean, is there? I mean, have there been confirmed cases in Arizona at this point? I mean, is there a sense of like we've got to get these? We've got to get more respirators. I mean, we've got to protect the people. Are you keeping away, visitors?
Yeah, they've shut down. No one can visit. Every morning we have to take our temperatures and log it. But you know what, man? I get the sense that nobody wants to be the next place on the news, because we've had a couple of people that we suspected, but, the management and, the powers that be, they're just very, they don't want anyone talking about it. It's almost like they don't want it to exist because I really don't think anybody wants to be on the 7 o'clock news,
Well, I mean, so does that mean that they're basically trying to ignore it away? I mean, that sounds like what Donald Trump was doing basically for the first 3 weeks of this thing.
I mean, yeah, like I said, man, I just think management and the people who aren't, directly involved, they want to protect their jobs. And I like I said, I don't think anybody wants to be on the news, with the C word attached to them,
All right. Well, I appreciate the call, Eric. Good
All
luck.
right,
Stay
Sam,
safe.
I'm a huge fan, man. Really love what you guys do, and thanks for taking my call.
All right. Thanks for calling. Stay safe. Scary. Calling from a 954 area code. Who's this? Where are you calling from? Oh, wait. Did I lose my... How did that happen? Let me try that again. Bear with me. Hold on, 954.
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report.
I don't know
Please use no speakerphone and have your one comment or question ready.
I need to get
Listen
another...
for Sam to call out your area code.
At least one more
Sam
computer.
will be you shortly.
And I need more monitors. I need more computers. If Milo was a little bit older. Hello? Who's this?
Wow. Michael from Miami.
Michael.
Wow.
Been a long time, Michael.
I thought it was almost get disconnected there for a second because you went silent.
Yeah, well, I'm back.
Congratulations. Well, welcome. Greetings from the belly of the beast.
Yeah.
Where coronavirus lives and polls are going on. Okay, a couple quick things. Number one, it's not going to make any difference if there is a depressed voter turnout, which I think there will be because of the virus. I think that having been up on what they call the Treasure Coast this past weekend, people were going on about their business pretty normally, although the way things are going down here, every 3 days brings another cataclysmic shift like it is with everybody else, but
Right.
we are especially feeling it. They're finally going to close the bars, the restaurants, takeout only. Gyms are being closed. Hospitals are now setting up potential drive-by testing facilities, but they're still not going to be able to get it done for at least another month. They are able to go ahead and turn around the tests at one specific hospital chain within a couple of hours because they have labs on site, but most of the other hospital chains down here don't have that kind of access, at least not yet. And, of course, the big bugaboo is you can't get tested unless your personal physician says that you meet certain criteria. It's not like you just walk in there and go, hey, fire me up here. It doesn't work that way.
Because they don't have many tests.
Well, they're getting better. Yes, you're right. They're horrifically behind, and we can spend. And I think you hit the nail on the head earlier in the show. I think you talked about the privatization or the attempt to monetize the tests, right?
I think that's got to be what it is. I mean,
Exactly.
nobody
Come on.
has.
What are we, idiots? Were we 5? Of course that's what they did. They looked at the WHO results. They realized they couldn't touch it because there's already essentially a printed brand. They couldn't expand on it, so they said, nah, we'll get our own. And in doing so, they cost us a valuable 6 weeks, which we may never get back. Anyway, a lot of things are upside down here. Otherwise, I've got 2 staff members having to stay home because when schools close, guess what happens to their child care?
Right.
It disappears. Those people have to stay home. So I've got to figure out a way as a small businessman to keep them on salary, keep them functioning, keep money and somehow revenues in place so that I can continue to do business while at the same time serving my clients. And, I'd be interested because I know you have other attorneys who are and I consider you a friend of the show. Okay, maybe I'm being presumptuous, but I do.
You consider me a friend of the show? I appreciate that.
Yeah, I think you have other people who are similarly situated. I think the immigration attorney out of Washington State, right?
Ronald Reagan, yes.
Yeah, he's right in the middle of it too. So I mean, you do what you can.
And we should say what's going on with ICE. Like I mean, it feels anecdotally, at least from what he's going through, that they are and he's got friends who are attorneys too, whose clients it feels like they are at the very least being incredibly negligent, and in some instances like just willfully negligent.
In terms of what?
In terms of exposing immigrants to this.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. We have a rule now. I handle a lot of injured workers, okay, in my practice, and they like to come by and drop by. They just do, and that's one of the reasons my clients have my cell phone number and they have a chance to contact me all the time. The problem with access is that while it gives them a certain amount of peace of mind, they also take it upon themselves to just drop in. And normally that isn't a problem. It's a bit of a hassle, but you handle it because that's what you have staff for. But they can't do that now. And I had to have a contact and conversation with a couple of them who come by and they're freaked out because they can't get their medical care or their bills aren't being paid. And comp clients are much more needy than regular personal injury clients. They just are because of the nature of the injury and the nature of the benefits, or lack thereof, especially down here. So they come by and you have to tell them, look, nothing goes on here. I've had to have conversations with defense attorneys and say, look, my clients will appear for your depositions, but only by phone, or you can Skype. And there's been not a lot of pushback, but most of the administrative law judges have agreed that makes sense. The ironic part is state courts in our area are shut down for 2 weeks, but the administrative law judges are still open, at least in name only. I mean, they can still conduct business, but only by phone. So everybody's making as many adjustments as possible to try to minimize in-person contact. I've had to, like I said, I'm having my people work from home. A lot of the insurance companies are having their people work from home, as are the defense attorneys. It's a domino effect, Sam.
Yeah.
It literally is a domino effect that starts from the head and goes all the way to the tail.
Michael, what is your sense of do you think this is gonna it's your sense that the coronavirus will not implicate the primary results?
Okay, my answer to that question is it'll implicate turnout, not outcome.
Okay.
Because Biden's going to win by, instead of winning by 35, he'll win by, 18. Okay? It's not in doubt. I'm sorry to say this to you. And the last time I actually attempted to call the show, Michael and Brendan gave me the stiff arm and basically told me that I was, an old guy who didn't know what the hell he was talking about. They didn't mean it that way, but their implication was clear that their advocacy was clouding their judgment, in my opinion. Bernie Sanders'
in
ideas
Florida
are outstanding. I support them. I do. I think the majority of the people in this country support the fight for 15 and expanded medical care coverage and make sure that there's some type of equality when it comes to income distribution. But he's the wrong vessel to deliver that message. It's true in my state, I can tell you for a fact, and that was even before the Castro comments. So when he's down by 35 points by every reputable poll in the state, the outcome will not be changed. He may lose 47-29 instead of 55 to 18 or something. I mean, that's how big the discrepancy was. The bad news is this. My state is also unfortunately trending horribly Republican, and Trump beats both Biden and Sanders by at least 7 points. Now, he beats Biden by 2 to 3.
Right.
He beats Bernie by 7 so far.
Well, I think the ship has sailed in terms of Florida, to be honest.
No. And here's what I'm going to. Now, I disagree with you on this, and I'm more of an optimist about this. Okay. Now, you know I've kidded about the Obama stuff, and I've sent you grapefruits and lost bets and won bets and blah blah blah. But this state,
California grapefruits.
Obama carried this state twice.
You sent me California grapefruits.
No, it did happen. Okay, 2008 was an exception because of the economy. But he won 2012 straight away, okay? And I think with the right candidate, I know you're not going to like to hear this, and I have arguments with my progressive friends all over the country about this. Biden stands a better chance of winning my state for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is he appears to be less threatening, he's less bombastic, and more palatable, for lack of a better term, than Bernie does.
The bottom line is like we have the data now, and older people reject Sanders, younger people reject Biden, and the fact is that older people come out and vote in significantly more numbers than younger people. I mean, it's as simple as that.
Do you remember your great analogy about fishing in different ponds you used earlier in the year? I think you made a reference to it, that the way to win this election was to not fish in the same pond, but you had to fish in different ponds. I think that was a rough approximation of what you said, right?
Yeah, something to that effect.
Right. Well, the problem with that is there has to be fish in the pond that you're trying to catch.
Well, that's right.
And the people you want to get to come to the polls, they don't vote. They don't vote. They talk. They go to rallies. They get on blogs. They don't vote. I don't know why.
I've heard a couple of theories.
I can't explain
I've heard a couple of theories
of
about it. That part of it is just that, like, in fact, Jamel Bowie wrote a piece, I think, in the Times about this the other day. I think the first time you do something, it's always more intimidating, right? I mean, no matter what it is you do. And the first couple of times you do it, and it's intimidating, even if it's not something that, the third or fourth time you do it, it's not intimidating. The other thing is that there have been a tremendous amount of obstacles that are also set up to prevent young people from voting.
That's true recently, and that is true, especially when you have those nonsensical laws about not accepting student IDs but accepting gun licenses.
And closing polling places in colleges, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, but the problem is this goes back, I'm going to pull the older boomer thing. I've been covering elections since I was 16, 20 years old, okay? And I can remember the cry and the complaints and the problems about young people not voting going back to 1980.
Yep.
1984. This has been going on from time immemorial. And my theory on that is pretty simple. When you're younger, you don't have as much at stake. Now, you do now because of climate change and a lot of the things that are more exacting in terms of being an existential threat. But you don't own property. You don't have kids. You're not invested in the school system.
I don't think that's what it is.
Tax structure. You really don't care too much about what goes on in your state and local government because it doesn't affect you except maybe they close the bars down early. I don't mean to be a horrible.
I don't think that's what it is.
Not your
I don't
audience.
think that's what it is. I'll tell you something.
That's not your audience, but
Here,
that's the audience.
I'll tell you something.
The majority of people in this country under the age of 35.
Michael, I would argue that if you started, if you allowed, and I'm not saying that we should, but if you allowed people to vote at age 16, I would bet you that by the time that they're 20, the rates for 20-year-olds voting would be significantly higher.
As I would say in deposition, what's the factual basis for that statement?
Well, what's the factual basis? I mean, you're trying to argue that they're not invested in it, but at the same time, you say that because of climate change, that they're very invested in it. I mean,
I said it's changing.
There's no.
It hasn't changed.
But the thing is, you don't see that in the numbers. I mean, so like the fact is that I think that like at that age, when it's the first time for you to vote, you don't feel the same confidence that you do the second time you vote. It takes a while for people to get used to the idea.
You really think it's a confidence issue? I think it's just a caring issue. Now, look, Greta Thunberg and the rest of that generation, it's different from when I was 16. It's different when you were 16. It's just a different world. Everybody knows that. I get that. And we're far more plugged in and far more wired in information and informational sources than we did before. But the problem is, I don't see it still being a compelling reason for people to go to the polls.
Well,
if you ask an average 17-year-old or 18-year-old, hey, what do you want to do this Tuesday? It's either cruise the beach or go vote or canvass neighborhoods. I got news for you, and you know what the answer is going to be.
Well,
and that's not to say that you don't have a valid point. It's hard to change habits until you have something at stake. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, I think there probably is something to that, but I also think it's a question of like, of making it easier for younger people to vote, because as you get older, you just realize like there's nothing that's that, these type of things are just not that challenging. And you realize that like it's just not that hard to do. And, it's both sides of the equation, I guess is my point. And we could make it
hard to do or important to do.
Well, look, but no, there's a difference. But those are two different sides of the same equation, right? Like you're always making an assessment. What's the opportunity cost? What's how much of an effort do I have to I'm going to climb this hill. Well, I'm going to climb it because there's stuff at the top of the hill I want, and I weigh that against it's not a very steep climb, and if it's like not a steep climb at all, then what I'm climbing for doesn't have to be so great. You know what I mean? Like it's on both ends of the equation. But
that presumes I want to climb a hill in the first place, but that's another argument. Listen, while I have you here, and since we haven't talked in a while, I got to ask you a couple quick things. My state is in play if, and I know you don't want to hear this, but if Biden is the nominee, how much firepower is the progressive left going to really put into getting rid of this guy in the White House? Because it can be done, but it can't be done with a half-assed effort. They have to make sure they commit to putting the resources into the ground game to be able to get the people out to vote. Because the one thing you're dead on about is this has nothing to do with ideology. It has nothing to do, and this is what I think you guys have been missing the point on when it comes to Biden versus Sanders. Your points in an intellectual debate are absolutely spot on, but they don't matter. The majority of the country wants this guy gone.
Oh no, I agree.
Away.
I agree. I think that's been clear. I think that's been clear. That's been clear with the data. Like you have 65% of the people coming out telling exit pollsters, I'm voting not based upon my ideology or the ideas of this guy. I'm voting based upon my perception he can win, and that perception was basically created by having all of the people who ran against him come out and endorse him. So if the question is like, do I anticipate if Biden is the nominee that AOC will go down to Florida and hold
work
rally?
Broward County and work Palm Beach County and work Orlando? She better.
I'll tell you why she will. I'll tell you why she will. I'll tell you why she will.
Even significant to get this guy out of here.
I'll tell you why she will. Because she's going to be talking to voters that hopefully she'll see in 12 years.
Okay, I understand that. But how about you? You yourself, you're a perfect example. You went door to door out in Worcester to go ahead and canvass on the Massachusetts primary, okay? I wish you'd done it in Wisconsin because I think it had been a little bit more illustrative for you. But okay, it was a
well,
good,
I'm from Worcester.
Good effort. Well, only because it's a swing state that's going to decide the election, that's all. But my point is, are you going to devote the resources of the show and just go foursquare into it, or are you still going to be a little pissed off that they turned around and said, "Hey, Bernie, no, sorry, we're not into your ideas," even though in your eyes, Joe Biden's lost his fastball. By the way, in my eyes as well. I think
everybody's
so
eyes.
But
everybody's
that
eyes.
Doesn't matter anymore.
Well, I know. I think with coronavirus, frankly, I think that I think that's been the great equalizer. I mean, my sense of Biden's chance of winning 3 weeks ago is very different than it is today.
Really?
Oh, without
really
a doubt.
Think so?
Oh, without a doubt. I mean, look,
No,
we're
I
going to have.
disagree. I think that whoever had a D behind their name was going to have an equal, because the 2018 elections proved that. Get a D behind your name, and you have a puncher's chance. Better than that, of beating this guy.
Well,
because
but here's the thing. Here's the thing. But here's the thing. Biden. Here, Michael. Here's the thing.
The hatred
Michael.
for this guy
Michael.
is so deep.
I agree with you.
It doesn't matter.
I agree with
Just
you.
Get him to the pool.
I agree with you,
Put a freaking
Michael.
stick against him.
Do
He
people
would win.
hear me on the phone? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I'm sorry.
All
I'm
right.
sorry.
Everybody's
Go ahead.
getting very impassioned, but the
You're my friend. I haven't talked to you in 6 months.
I know it's been a long time. You sent me California grapefruits, but let me.
I know. I got.
Not Florida grapefruits. I was not looking for California. I was not looking for California grapefruits from the guy from Florida.
Man.
But listen. But here's the point. You're talking about you nailed it right on the head. A generic D is going to win. The problem is that and this was 3 weeks ago. I think, frankly, the economy is going to be in the crapper, and I think people are going to be aware that Donald Trump screwed this coronavirus thing up. You know, there's a lot of other questions about the election, but I think that we're already starting to see this. I think he's going to have real problems. Like I think they've already. Let me put it this way: they canceled the subpoenas for the Bidens.
Yeah, I saw that
2 weeks ago. Okay, and
but
they
you
did.
know why they did that, right?
Well,
they were going to depose Ivanka too.
Yeah, well,
the House was ready to go with those subpoenas for Ivanka and Don Jr.
And
they were ready to go.
And I think the other problem was, frankly, is that this became a problem. That there's no way to go down there. Like Donald Trump is going to get up there now and talk about Burisma and this and that, and people are going to be like, "Excuse me." Listen, how many people? How many people?
What is Burisma? Is that something you get at Starbucks? They're not going to care about.
No. Listen.
The one thing he had,
Michael,
that was his
how
final
did
harbinger
Hillary Clinton
was the
lose?
economy.
How did Hillary Clinton lose?
You know damn well. There's a couple reasons. That's a multi-texted answer, but I'll
Right.
give you the fast version. 1, the Comey letter. 2, she got lazy and she's a lousy retail politician. And 3, she had horrible advice. Plus,
Right.
she has 25 years of hatred and history built in against her, which is institutionally baked into the election.
True. Listen, I think the odds are that Donald Trump is going to lose. But in terms of, and this again was a 3-week-old assessment, Joe Biden, if you wanted to knock off some voters in Wisconsin and in Michigan and in Pennsylvania, and zeroing in, it's not Donald Trump saying this stuff. It's just going to be, targeted Facebook ads. It's going to be, if you wanted to make this argument that this guy is corrupt, that this guy is, is going to cut.
Guy?
It's Biden is going to cut your Social Security. I mean, the Donald Trump was going to run to the left of Joe Biden. I don't think it's
trade. That's a problem.
on
Yeah, we talked
trade
about that 4
in Michigan
years
and
ago.
Wisconsin. Yes. So my point is that I think a lot of that is an analysis that is 3 weeks old. The world has changed dramatically in 3 weeks, but and like I say, now I'm more confident that anybody, and I've been saying for a long time, like a soup can. I would vote for a soup can over Donald Trump.
Exactly. You could put a stick figure and put a D on his head, and he would win. Look, I know you got to go, but I want to throw one more thing out here that I know is going to be unpopular, but it's got to be said. If you want to win back the industrial Midwest, if you want to get back to the trade issue and win it, Joe Biden has got to pick only one person for that VP candidate, and I think you'll agree with me on this. And you're going to have to go twist his arm to do it, but you got to go get Sherrod Brown. You put Sherrod Brown on the ticket, and you can win this election, and you can probably win it with a little room to spare. If he goes with what that idiot Chuck Schumer wants to do and picks Kamala Harris or picks Val Demings out of Orlando, who was on the impeachment manager committee, or picks Stacey Abrams, this election is lost.
Well, wait a second. You just told me that Joe Biden was going to win.
What? I'm sorry?
You just told me that Joe Biden was going to win.
I said if you want to guarantee. Well, it's close to a guarantee as possible.
Well, wait a second, Michael. You've changed your tune. First of all, they're never going to pick. They're never. Listen, they're never going to pick Sherrod Brown. They're never going to pick Sherrod Brown. Sherrod Brown.
Probably.
If you do that, you're jeopardizing the Senate, and they're not going to do it.
I'm sorry. You know what? The Senate's important. The White House is more important. You saw the story in the New York Times
Hey,
about
dude,
the pressuring
he
judges.
just committed to having a woman. Did you not see the debate? Did you see the debate?
I'm as egalitarian as they come.
Did you see the debate?
It's
over. It's over. He's going to have to pick a woman. If he doesn't pick a woman.
Who says? Says who?
Joe
says
Biden.
Who?
He said it in the debate.
Tell me somebody who's better than Sherrod Brown on the issues you
He
and I
said it in the debate. It's over. Your boy blew it.
I know.
According to
He's
you.
Not my boy. I vote for Caligula against Trump. Please, you know better than that.
Yes, Jesus.
Tell me who's better. I know what he said.
I gotta go.
You know as well as I do. Politics are fluid.
I gotta go.
They're fluid.
Maybe you got to call in more often.
I can't get through. You're too damn popular.
All right. Talk to you later. Michael, it was a pleasure.
Well, hey, listen, one quick question. Is the audio on the website ever going to come back?
Yeah. We'll work on it. We're working on it.
Be good.
Hopefully
Be
in the next day or two.
Take care of yourself.
All right, you
Proud
too.
of you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
I like that. Joe Biden's going to they'll vote for anybody, but if he picks Kamala Harris, he's going to lose. I don't know. All right, I know we're going a little bit late, but that's we're on coronavirus time. Speaking of which, look at these guys. Let's take a look at this. Hold on for 1 second. Fox News, Fox and Friends. You know, I do not envy these people who have to now pretend like, oh, remember like 3 days ago when we were saying that this was no big deal? And now we got to sort of slowly come around, but we got to just turn this ship a little bit slow. Here we go. This is Fox and Friends. Remember, a couple of days ago, they were, this is basically a hoax.
Thousands of spring breakers ignoring calls of social distancing and flooding a Florida beach. These pictures show massive crowds at Clearwater Beach, which hasn't restricted access yet. The city council may vote this week on whether to close the beaches, following the lead of Miami and Fort Lauderdale. A lot of people can't believe when they see those pictures.
It's apparently the same thing at South Beach as well. And if all those people are congregating and then they're going to leave in a couple of days, that's what community spread is all about.
Yeah. Pause it. I don't have to say it because I'm doing it, but I'm saying it anyways. This network in prime time has been dedicated for the past 3 weeks to the proposition that this is a media hoax where the libs are just trying to, what was it that Trish Regan said before they kicked her off the air just a couple of days ago? She called it the coronavirus impeachment. And now they're like, I don't know why anybody's not heeding the calls from the CDC. It's almost as if they've been listening to this network for weeks.
Leave in a couple of days. That's what community spread is all about.
Yeah, one of my really good friends lives in that area. She owns those Chicken Salad Chicks restaurants, and she.
Oh my God! How many times did she bring us up? The chicken salad lady. I can never even remember her name, but I do remember that her best friend is a chicken salad entrepreneur.
Days. That's what community spread is all about.
Yeah, one of my really good friends lives in that area. She owns those Chicken Salad Chicks restaurants, and she says they're going to stay open because they're not as affected down there, at least right now.
So the question is, are you the...
Wait a second. What? They're doing a segment on these people on the beach who are not leaving. And she said, well, my friend sells chicken salad sandwich. Chicken salad sandwiches. So, that inoculates you from the coronavirus. Chicken salad does.
Governor of Florida, and is it up to you to clear up those beaches? Or do you want a mandate from Washington to say, enough, you're not listening in all 50 states, so I'm going to have to do this from the nation's capital? So somebody's got to make that decision.
Well, it is a national problem. Let's see.
Thousands of spring breakers ignoring.
Let's see. Unbelievable. The president's starting to come around on this. I'm starting to realize it's not a hoax. It is not the Dems politicizing it. It actually turns out to be real. Who knew? Except for the Germans. The end of February, 18 days ago, 20 days ago, a startup in Berlin, Germany, produced 1.4 million tests for coronavirus to ship around the world. South Korea doing 10,000 a day. This is 1.4 million tests. The U.S. said, no, we can create our own. And now the U.S. has the lowest rate for testing its citizens around the world. And at one point, they went back and said, could we give you billions of dollars to give it to us? They waited because they wanted to make a profit. They wanted to monetize this. This is this was the same dynamic with Katrina. We're going to privatize FEMA. We're going to privatize FEMA. Job number one for those people who were supposed to get the buses to New Orleans was make a profit. So when they were put on notice that they would need the buses, it was their profit motive that said, well, we're not going to actually move them to where they need to be, because if it's a false alarm, we're going to lose money. We'll wait. What's the worst that could happen? Well, we saw what the worst that could happen was. That thing was subcontracted down so many times that everybody had this margin that they needed to make, and so they weren't going to go and deploy the buses. That's what we just saw. I'm convinced of it. Why would you say no? Why would you say no unless somebody in the administration wanted to monetize this? Mark this down, cut this clip. We may not know about this for years or maybe 6 months when somebody at the CDC basically comes out and says, all right, I've done everything I can do. Now I can tell the truth. But people are going to die because of this. And worse. I mean, it's like thousands could die because of this. The immiseration is going to be, this is all about catching it early. And we're not going to be ramped up to test a month later than we should have been. And look at the numbers now. It's nuts. They're all looking to monetize this. It's fascinating. Here's this jerk. Andrew Klavan. He is the Daily Wire. What's his title? Chief misogynist. Here he is.
And people will probably die, and I'm not belittling that. But as we stare at the skull, maybe we can use.
You know you've got a problem if you're having to say, like, I'm not belittling people dying. My guess is he's probably is.
Take a hit here, and people will probably die, and I'm not belittling that. But as we stare at the skull, maybe we can use this moment to think about what an even better future might look like. Just as a possible for instance, maybe this is the mom moment we've secretly been waiting for. I've spoken before about how I think feminism began to become a thing in the 18th century when industrialization destroyed the home industries that gave women their economic participation and power. Feminists have argued that that power was more important than women's contribution as mothers and homemakers, and I disagree. But now that children are staying home from school and workers are telecommuting, maybe this is a moment to wonder, do we really need to send our kids to government facilities where teachers' unions keep dangerous incompetence in place, spouting leftist gender horse manure? Couldn't more moms work from home so that kids can be schooled in the values of their families? It's worth wondering anyway.
Hey, maybe this dum-dum doesn't realize it, but there have been public schools around the country, like as essentially everywhere around the country since Reconstruction. I think the idea that women are deciding they want some type of economic power and that they can decide what is the most important role that they have in their lives, it's not a function of schools that started in the 1870s and 1880s and 1890s. But I don't know.
If our new technology could bring back some of the home industries. Maybe this is a moment when we solve the college debt problem by not sending kids to crappy colleges where they learn to hate their native land by reading communist histories by guys like Howard Zinn. Maybe this is the moment when places like Hillsdale can teach the truth and beauty online, and that'll count as a college education.
Hillsdale, I think, is a sponsor of certainly of Mark Levin, and I think I would imagine probably sponsors that. It's a religious college that also sort of basically theocrats.
Truth and beauty online, and that'll count as a college education. Everything we have as a nation can vanish in a flash, and everything we have as individuals will vanish in a flash when we die. It's not a bad thing to consider how to strengthen the virtuous behaviors that make our free systems possible. The world isn't ours, it's God's. We just live in it for a little while. And we don't make the rules of how best to do that. He does. And we've rewritten them at our peril. Now,
what is it with the guys at the Daily Wire where they basically have this direct line to God? Ben Shapiro is the Pope of the Jews. He can tell you what the good Jews is. Andy Klavan here is telling us what God says. Apparently God, the guy God, speaks to Andrew Klavan. Tells him that really the women should be back in the homes. That's the truth. And we know it because God came down and wrote a book about it. Told us what was right. And then people started educating the women, and they started going to these schools and started thinking that they should have control over their own lives. This is the stuff that we complain about with the Taliban. I mean, right? That's why the Taliban does not want women to go to schools, girls to go to schools, because they start getting a little uppity. It's unbelievable, this guy. I'm not belittling people dying, but maybe it's a good thing because women will realize that their place is in the home. It may be a decent trade-off. But it's all in God's hands. I know because God told me. And he's a guy. All right, let's see. Do we have one more here? Oh, what kind of insanity? Here's Laura Ingraham. We must stroke dear leader.
Don, I want to talk to you about the food supply. We've had an enormous amount of panic on the part of Americans in wanting to make sure they have enough food for their families. What can you tell us tonight about that concern of American families and how they should be reacting?
Well, I think that there's a shortage of toilet paper, of course. It's always a shortage of toilet paper.
I'll wait and tell you who this guy is.
And there's a shortage of certain Clorox products and products for cleaning. But people are panicking. And
bear with me, folks.
It's not about the Fed. I don't think the Fed can solve this problem. It's about giving people hope that there's a solution out there. I mean, the Fed has cut rates to nothing, did not help. The Fed has said they're going to provide $700 billion. It didn't help. This is about providing hope to the people. And I think President Trump has done everything right so far. He has closed the borders, which is the right thing to do. And I think Trump is tough enough that if one of the companies has a virus vaccine or very close to it, I think he's going to force it and make it happen and, have some blue sky out there.
Yeah.
Laura Ingraham paused there because I think that even she was sort of shocked at this. Incidentally, he's the CEO of Gristedes, it's a supermarket, probably looking for some type of bailout or some type of bonus from the government. The idea that the technicians, the doctors, the researchers, the clinical folks who are working on the vaccine, we really when we're faced with a pandemic, we really need somebody to push us a little bit. And I don't know. Maybe we'll hold this back for a little bit. But Donald Trump, he's so tough. We couldn't resist. We had to come out with a vaccine. This is just like these people are living in a completely alternate universe. It's stunning. It's also the worst grosser in New York. Yelp gives it like 1.5 reviews for this. All right, folks. Little long. Oh, we went really long. All right. That's all the time that we have for today. Tomorrow I will attempt to take some IMs. I'm still like working through the technology. I got like it's a little bit of a juggling that's going on, but I appreciate your patience and your tolerance and your checking out the show today. We will be back live tomorrow, and I may hop on YouTube tonight to talk about the results as they come in. I may be doing Hayes from here as well. I'm not sure. We'll see through Skype. I guess that means I'll have to shave. We will see you. What the heck? Oh, there it is. We'll see you tomorrow. Tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there.